New Landing's Job Chat is brought to you in part by the Prosperity Advisory Group, the next step in your financial future, and by the EBS Group with an unparalleled background in Oracle solutions and services.
In 2012, the United States government passed the Jobs Act bill. Is that good? Is it bad? What does it mean to you? You'll find out today on Job Chat. Your hosts today are Hector Silva and Sarah Kane, and our guest is Paul Ewing. Welcome, Paul.
Glad to be here.
Sarah, can you tell us a little about Paul?
Definitely. Paul Ewing is the founding president of Prosperity Advisory Group, the largest independent brokerage firm in Kansas City with over 80 independent financial advisors. He is a certified financial planner, general securities principal, a former board member of the local chapters of the Institute for the Certified Financial Advisors and the Financial Planning Association, a former adjunct professor for the College for Financial Planning, and member of Multi-Financial Security President's Advisory Board. Paul has won a number of awards over the years, including the 2011 KC Business Magazine Best Personal Wealth Manager in the KC Area Award. And in 2011, he was just listed among America's top financial planners by Consumers Research Council of America. Paul is also very active in the community. He is on the board of directors for Mission Southside. He is also founder and volunteer director for Living Waters Christian Canoe Ministry, as well as the director of the South Asia Field Team. Welcome, Paul.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
Well, thank you for being here. Why don't we just start by defining what is the Jobs Act bill?
Well, at its face, you would assume that the Jobs Act would be about creating jobs. And in fact, they're taking a roundabout way of getting to that effect. Jobs Act is actually an acronym which jump-starting our business startups. So at its face, the bulk of what this bill deals with is how do you go from a concept into funding a startup business. And it takes you through the steps from the baby steps of a micro business and a micro venture all the way up to going public and the restrictions therein. So let's start with the smallest end and kind of think through how this works. One of the access points that all small business owners deal with is they have an early decision to make. Are they going to raise their capital in the form of equity, bring in shareholders, stakeholders, or are they going to raise capital in the form of debt? Given our current banking environment, it is harder and harder to secure debt financing for new business startups. And the number one cause of business failures is lack of capital. And so what they've done is they've made it simpler and they've reduced the regulatory burden for a small business owner to raise capital in the markets. Now, when you think of the markets, remember this market is largely a friend and family market. But even there, you have restrictions. You have restrictions under Regulation D. You have restrictions in terms of the number of shareholders that certain business forms can have. You have restrictions on the ability to make solicitations of these business offerings. You can't just say, hey, I've got a great idea, I'm going to put it on Craigslist and see how many people want to participate. And when I say you can't do that, I really should say you couldn't do that. But under these new rules, there are new opportunities, including crowdfunding, including broader rules about availability to make general solicitations than what we've had available in the past.
Just what is crowdfunding?
So crowdfunding would be you would post an idea on an exchange and say, I want to start a business that is going to be a car wash for your tropical fish. I don't know. And there's a great market for this, and here's where the market, and to do this, I'm going to need $1,700. Here's your chance to own 1% of this business enterprise, and it's just going to cost you $17. So it's the micro venture concept of crowdfunding. So you get lots of people put in a little bit of money because all of them say, hey, if I went to a movie, I would have spent $17, right? And I got a shot. Who knows? Anything could happen. That's the concept behind crowdfunding.
So it's like buying stock on a miniature basis.
On a tiny scale. And you know, the issue is that there have always been some real concerns around this area because, is there adequate investor education? So one of the things that this bill does, or this law does, is it defines what an investor education information needs to look like. And so that a potential investor in one of these micro ventures has a base information that they know about everything that they might consider doing. Is that a viable way to raise funds? We think it will become an increasingly viable way for small business ventures to get started. But beyond that, let's just say that let's go upstream a little bit, and now we're not washing tropical fish, but we're doing a business venture that's going to require some capital. You're going to require some equipment, and some of that you can collateralize, but even if you're going to collateralize your equipment, you still have to have a down payment. And so to come up with that down payment, you're going to a larger group of people. Well, these investments on their face, have a high return expectation. So the hurdle rate for a private equity firm to invest in a private placement is somewhere over 25 to 30% a year is their annual return expectation. So keep that in mind, because in every venture capital process, there is a crossover point where that entrepreneur looks at their venture capitals as the angels that make their business and their dream possible. And then comes the day when they're the leeches that are sucking all the lifeblood and all the fun out of the business. So you have to bear that in mind as you go to this. But if you're considering the fact of having your dream go wasted because you just don't have the capital to do it, this Jobs Act has taken an interesting approach. But now you go a step further. They've now made it easier for you to take your business public and to be on a public exchange. They've also, for certain thresholds of businesses, they've made it possible for you to set your compensation without having to get a majority vote. The rule that's been put into place before, which made it very hard for talented people to want to work for publicly traded companies. They've eased those restrictions. Kind of an interesting choice in terms of the overall scale of things. At the end of the day, it's really about streamlining the rules to make it simpler. The final thing I would think about is once you've gone public, there's a Rule 144, which restricts the amount of founder shares, if you will, that you could sell at any given point. They've eased those rules considerably as well in this act, or in this bill.
Where does the Small Business Administration fit into all of this?
They're not specifically tied. In other words, it's not required that you use the SBA. I will tell you that securities laws are a real body of law, and I would highly recommend anyone who's looking at doing a small business venture funding on however small or however large of a scale, that they get good counsel who's schooled. There are a lot of areas that of regulatory concern that you don't want to cross, whether it be the Fish and Wildlife or the EPA or the IRS. But I always remind my clients and my advisors, the SEC, those guys carry guns. When they show up at your office, they're packing. So it really makes sense to get wise counsel who understands really what you can say and can't say. How do you convey facts about your project and its potential without being promissory or being without a basis for the statements that are being made? Those are important parts.
So what I hear you saying is there are so many complexities to this that it's best to get somebody who is fully versed in it, some professional to help lead you along the way.
And that's always an attorney. I will say this about the investment advisory community and the securities industry, since that's my field. We can't help you in this. Because the reality is that we represent investments, registered investments to our clients. Investing in a small business, that's different from investing in a mutual fund or a stock of a publicly traded company. And from a regulatory perspective, there's a definite line at which we can't really get involved with that because clients can't distinguish the difference between the two, and we have a duty to do that. So, I mean, that I will tell you up front. It's almost always an attorney, sometimes an accountant who's well versed in the rules, but they're probably going to want a backup of somebody with that background. Remember, this is brand new, so it's only 45 to 60 days old. So there's a lot of folks still scratching their heads and working their way through. Really, what does this mean?
So are the organizations already in place to handle this?
Yeah, the microventure exchanges already exist. The crowdfunding sources already exist. If you Google, you'll find a number of them. I would recommend you do background checks on the ones that you want to consider. If you've got a little capital and you want to try it out, maybe you should invest in somebody else. Maybe you want to consider taking a stake in somebody else's just to see what the process looks like. Tiny. Remember, it's recreational investment.
Paul, back to
New Landing's Job Chat will be back right after a word from our sponsors.
Hello, my name is William Easley, Managing Director of Wealth Management with Prosperity Advisory Group. A job loss is an unsettling experience that almost always challenges finances and lifestyle. Important decisions need to be made immediately that work toward protecting financial security, which include making significant adjustments to day-to-day spending habits. The obvious catch is how to make ends meet on less income. If you should find yourself and your family in this situation, you should begin by itemizing all of your current expenses, no matter how small, and assigning them as either fixed or discretionary. Examples of fixed expenses are mortgage payments or health insurance premiums. Discretionary expenses would include entertainment costs or that weekly dinner out at your favorite restaurant. The key is to eliminate as many of your discretionary expenses as possible and reduce your fixed expenses if able. More importantly, don't postpone these decisions even if you receive a generous severance package. You must tackle them right away. Your ability to maintain a wide array of financial options may depend on a proactive rather than a reactive approach to budgeting so that you can protect your other financial goals like retirement and the assets earmarked for them. Again, I'm William Easley with Prosperity Advisory Group, the next step in your financial future.
Paul, back to the bill itself. Why do they focus on startups?
So think of the job market in a broader scale, and the single largest employer, the federal government. The single biggest burden on the future of our economy is the federal government. The answer can't be to continue to hire more government employees. We look at the burden of the current spending and debt level, and I always want to add, when you talk about the United States debt and you compare it to other countries, there's a piece of that dialogue that's consistently missing. We don't talk about the assets. In your business, you ran a balance sheet that looked at both the assets and the liability. But we never talk about the assets of the United States. And when you compare the assets of the U.S. versus other countries, it's a significant matter. That being said, debt is debt, and debt will need to be repaid. And while there's a lot of anxiety around the amount of debt, I don't think it's really accurate to think that it's going to affect this economy, this economic cycle, and it may not even affect the next economic cycle. But 2 economic cycles away from here, this is going to come back to be an issue for us. So increasing the government was not the answer. Corporations, publicly traded, the large cap companies, the core of our economy, is seeing extraordinary bottom line growth, record earnings. In fact, earnings have gone past the 2007 levels to all-time highs. But they're shrinking their top line. In other words, they're making more money on less sales. They're doing less economic activity and focusing instead on their bottom line. Now, it'd be great if that bottom line was then filtering out in the way of wage increases and increased economic activity or capital expenditures, but we have a capital utilization rate. It's still in the 70s. So businesses don't feel a need to do capital expenditures. The big companies don't. And frankly, they like the idea of swelling their balance sheets. Announcements this year, it's been amazing, quarter after quarter, the number of dividend buyback, the stock buyback programs that are being announced and dividend increases. Corporations are not spending on growing the economy. So where then do you turn? Where then will be the employers of the future? And I think that that's the business startup. And, in reality, recessions are the reign of our economy. Many great ideas set in the minds of employees with great jobs sitting in a corner window office with a company car and a great benefits package say, boy, if I'd start a company and it would change the world. But they've got a job. And the opportunity cost for them to start that is just too high. Then comes an economic slowdown. That person no longer has a job, and that great idea bubbles up, and it becomes the next innovative change. It's not hard to predict. It's a reliable cycle that within the next 5 to 10 years, you're going to see a round of innovation, the likes of which we haven't seen as a country in nearly 3 decades, because we really haven't had this kind of a recessionary pressure to cause entrepreneurs to turn those great ideas into marketable products and services. And that's what they're doing, is they're looking at this and saying, look, if we're going to have a lasting impact, it's going to be by taking those great ideas that rest in the minds of those business leaders who now need a way to use their talents. That's where innovation is going to come from. And of all the things that we have in our economy that have been played wrong since this began in 2007, this is probably one of the best things that we're doing.
So this is, in a way, a very forward-looking bill, creating jobs in the future.
Right. This is so uncharacteristic. This will affect nobody during this election cycle, but for decades to come, we'll see fruit from this. I do believe that's true.
And so we're looking at the companies that exist today who have learned how to make their profits. They have learned how to live with the workforce they have, and therefore have no incentive to continue to add to that workforce. You're looking then instead at these small businesses not only to start but to grow as the economy grows, and then they become the employers of the future.
Right. So the research and development laboratories of big corporations has been outsourced to small business startups. New ideas are not being hatched in R&D departments today like they could. Research and development is both the lifeblood and the future of an enterprise, and it's a luxury. You know what I'm saying? I mean, so you have to have the kind of income, and you do need to understand the CFOs of these major publicly traded companies, they're not just being greedy. They've got two significant forces bearing down on them. One, in October of 2008, we learned that you really couldn't count on the banks. I mean, we were within hours of missing the UAW payroll in October of 2008 because when the overnight market froze up, you had to rely on the banks. And so a lot of these CFOs are saying, we want to be our own bank. We want to have our own cash reserves. We never want to be in the position where we're relying on short-term borrowing. And the second thing is you really have an undeterminable amount of cost per employee in the form of benefits. There's just no way to know what that's going to cost. And so it's really hard for businesses to want to staff up and hire today. New business startups make a lot more sense.
Well, you say that this is for the small business startups. The bill also does fund construction, infrastructure construction, and it also does something for extending unemployment benefits, does it not?
Right. And just to be clear, the bill that was presented in September of 2011 had a lot more of those features in it than the law that got passed in April of 2012. Okay, so yes, the states now have the power to have the flexibility on a state-by-state basis to extend unemployment levels to a historic length of period of time, but that gives them the power, not the funding. And then the second piece is with the shovel-ready public works programs that were already put in place. There was not a lot of additional growth to that. Now, one of the things that they do believe in is in economic theory, if you can, the biggest driver of world economics, 62% of all GDP activity in the world is the U.S. consumer. So the concept is if we can get more back, if we can keep more in the pockets of the U.S. consumer, they will drive the global economy. And that's why one of the things that's extended for a little longer is this payroll tax cut for employers under a certain level. $5 million in payroll don't have to, or they reduce what they have to pay in the employer side of FICA, but also it cuts that premium for the taxpayer too. Now, long-term impact of that, how the Social Security Administration can be so underfunded and you cut its premiums at the same time, that's a mystery. That's a mystery. We'll have to see how that
We're
one
banking
works.
on the startups.
We're banking on our startups, yes.
There has to be some magic involved. But,
Yeah, and then a miracle happens.
right.
And you know, I will say to you that innovation is, at the end of the day, for all that we want to think about fiscal policy and infrastructure and regulatory, innovation is the fuel of every great economy. And no matter how deep of a hole we dig ourselves in, we have always been a nation that innovates our way out of it.
And we have to have some trust in the people.
That's right.
And we can't plan for everything that's going to happen down the road because things change.
Right.
But people don't change.
That's right.
And they will still be there to be innovative and to try to do something to improve themselves.
Innovation, ingenuity. That's it. And and really, I think that's one of the great things about this particular act is it really speaks to that. And so for the person who's out there who is considering could I do a business startup, it makes sense to take the first step, familiarize yourself with what's in the bill or in the law. And the second step, retain an accountant and attorney to start to have some practical discussions about what you have in mind for starting the capital for your business. Someday we'll all be working for you.
So it sounds like this is the opportune time to start getting those ideas together and trying to come up with some sort of business plan.
I believe that's true. It's easier to access capital now through equity than it's been in years.
Fantastic. Well, we thank you so much for being with us today. We really have learned so much. And if someone wanted to contact you and get some further information or some advice, where could they reach you?
Our website is www.prosperity360.com. And that'll give you an introduction to the firm, our contact information, our phone number, and we'd be happy to help wherever we can. We're very excited about New Landings and what they're doing.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
You can hear more advice and information from Paul Ewing on a number of other job chats on other financial topics. You can catch these and all other podcasts on our website, www.newlandingsjobchat.org, or just search for Job Chat on YouTube.
Thank you. Until next time, may your days be full of health, happiness, and success.